The 49ers are looking to win a football game in Minnesota for the first time since 1992. The stars are aligning. Well, maybe the stars are aligning. We'll talk about that here. Sprint Right Option Podcast starts now.
Welcome, everybody.
We are live.
My name is Jason Aponte.
I am Andrew Pasquini.
We're working. That's it. We're working over here. That's it. Let's go Niners.
Let's go Niners. Sprint Right Option Podcast. My goodness, we are live. It is a new episode of the Sprint Right Option Podcast. I am Andrew Pasquini, joined as always by the incomparable Jason Aponte. Jason, we got a bit developing story coming onto the podcast here with Christian McCaffrey. I cannot think of a better time to introduce a new segment here. We're very honored, very excited. Hopefully we don't have to talk about too many injuries in this segment. We have more fun conversations. Unfortunately, we got to open with Christian McCaffrey and his Achilles calf. We want to welcome on Dr. Nirav Pandia. We really, really appreciate you joining as always. I believe this is the second time you've been on the Sprint Right Option Podcast. I want to start just how are you doing today? How are you doing on this lovely? It's a Friday. Good weekend. We're ready. Week 2. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great until that McCaffrey news broke. It's not a good Friday news dump that you want to hear that there's some issues going on with his Achilles.
No, yeah, Doc, you have to think about the bettors and the fantasy football players. What will they ever do if no one discloses exactly what's going on? Because people have to worry about those things. It's not like these teams are trying to win actual football games, Doc. Such heartless 49ers, that they are, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm sure Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch are like, wait, we got people playing fantasy football. We should let them know on Friday,
Well, they let Jordan Mason know on Friday, allegedly, right?
Yeah.
So, you got to let everybody know if Jordan Mason knows. No, so that's where obviously we're going to talk about here, this Christian McCaffrey injury. My big question is it started as a preseason camp thing where it's, hey, he has a calf. We're not concerned. He'll be ready for week 1. Then the thing happens last week where it's on the injury report as a calf/Achilles, which the addition of Achilles doesn't make anybody feel good. But then we're in this thing now where it's, hey, he's going to play Monday night. Oh, he's not playing Monday night. And now it's Wednesday was the worst day in terms of pain, and he's already out on Sunday. Is this, I guess, regression in the injury like a normal thing for this type of, I believe it's tendonitis the word they're using, or should Niner fans be concerned? It's really gone from, hey, he's good, like he'll be fine for week 1 to maybe injured reserve.
Yeah, and I think when we think about these injuries, we think about calf. You probably did involve the Achilles to some extent. I think they were just kind of how they were wording it. The tough thing with these injuries is that with an Achilles, you can feel pretty good. You can be doing kind of like resting and doing light practice. But looking at some of the videos, you really have to test it at full speed. And what may have happened was that, they're kind of like, okay, we're going to get you to play, but you have to go full speed. You have to try some stuff you do in a game scenario. And then it starts hurting. So I think more than anything else, this is probably just the natural progression of the injury. And you get to the point where you have to test it. And it just shows how severe it is, the fact that he goes full speed and suddenly he's having pain, as opposed to something weird happened like 2 weeks ago where it got worse. So I think it just shows how severe this is and how much of a chronic issue that might become if they don't rest it properly.
Doc, I've done independent research, and that term is used very loosely, especially when we talk about things that are going on in the real world.
Right.
But I think everybody's looking at the Achilles thing and thinking about Dre Greenlaw. And I found an article that was talking about what happened to Dre Greenlaw, and someone went through every single thing that kind of you can do to prevent. And he talked about the tendonitis. It's only a problem for a rupture if there's degeneration in the tendon itself. Obviously, just labeling it tendonitis and tendonitis is probably the only things that are similar in the two. But I had this weird remembrance, and I don't remember if that tendonitis that knocked Greenlaw out of the Week 18 game, which meant nothing and gave him time off, was that even in the leg that it happened during the Super Bowl? But I guess like what we're talking about is essentially what this gentleman was talking about in his article about the degeneration of the tendon. And without knowing all the details, like what are your thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think that, we kind of, when you get tendonitis, it can occur for one of two reasons. One is you're doing absolutely fine and you overdo something like acutely. Let's say like you have a heavy workload and you have inflammation, but then it just kind of resolves over time. That's like the least worrisome thing. And that doesn't have a risk of kind of an Achilles tendon rupture. What you get more worried about is this inflammation is developing from a long period of time. And then you start getting some of that chronic change in the tendon. Essentially, then it just like degenerated, and then it can potentially rupture. And if you look at people who are diagnosed with Achilles tendonitis kind of globally, the risk of a rupture usually lands somewhere between 5 to 10%. So, if this is more of a chronic issue and he has tendonitis, then you say that risk is that, I mean, this is not a big risk, but it's still a risk, especially for someone who's explosive. So I do worry that it started potentially at the end of last season. Now is starting to kind of linger into this season. For that long a period of time, you do worry about chronic changes. This doesn't seem like something that's just like, oh, he came into camp, he's a little sore, and now it's just kind of flaring up a little bit.
That leads into my next question is him, the explosion, all that. Is this something as simple as, hey, throw him on IR, let him sit for 4 weeks, he'll be good to go? Or is this something we could be potentially talking about week 14, 15, where it's, hey, he's still kind of having pain, but now these games are more important. He's going to play. Is that something that could be a concern later in the season?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when you get someone with an Achilles tendonitis in general, like if you just come into a clinic, you're a weekend warrior, we say 3 months. You got to take 3 months off, right? So, but obviously Christian McCaffrey is someone who can take 3 months off. So what you worry is that he comes to week 4, week 5, week 6. Let's say he goes on the IR and then he tests it again, and then it gets aggravated again. And then suddenly it's another 6 weeks off. And then we're talking about, okay, it's playoff time. Like, do you risk him going back in and injuring himself again? Or the potential other issue is that he comes back in, he's having a little bit of soreness, and then something else gets injured. He can't explode, he can't run. And I think everyone concentrates on the tendon part of it. Like, you don't want to rupture your tendon, but just like with anything else, if your Achilles is sore, you don't want him to hurt his knee, you don't want him to hurt his hip. So there are all these factors that go into avoiding a rupture, making sure you don't injure anything else. And obviously the key question is, can you actually be effective regardless of injury risk? Like, if your Achilles is hurting, is Christian McCaffrey, or does he perform like a third string running back? I mean, that's all these factors that go into this area, which is so critical to being effective.
Doc, I think what everybody is worried about is just like, hey, or just saying, and I'm, well, when I say they, me, the San Francisco 49ers don't need Christian McCaffrey to beat the Minnesota Vikings, New York Jets, Los Angeles Rams, right? Like, I think everybody's worried about whether he can be back for the Chiefs game. And everything kind of just sits there where it's like, will rest do this? Will rest, make everything okay? And I don't know that answer because we don't have the specifics of the details, but is there like a way where the 49ers just kind of put him on ice for a long time, like a longer time, and just say, hey, it's the stretch run, let's go for it? Because we did hear Kyle Shanahan say if it was a playoff game, you probably would have played.
Yeah, I mean, I think if in an ideal world, let's assume, and this is kind of the tough thing with injuries in NFL teams, is that if they keep winning, then that window of rest that they need him for extends out. So they go into like week 8, week 9, and they're like, if they're 8-1, 9-1, and you just keep extending it out. And then suddenly get to this point where, hey, if we do give him 2 months, 3 months, then suddenly you've got an injury that may actually have healed. And suddenly you don't have a Christian McCaffrey who's had 200 touches, who's got all this wear and tear on him. So unfortunately, what may determine when he comes back is how the team is doing. And also, what does it mean for the other players as well, too? Like, suddenly now Debo's getting more touches. Now Brandon's getting more touches. Bill's getting more touches. Are they getting banged up? So unfortunately, I think a lot of how he plays and when he comes back will be dependent on the team. But in an ideal world, you would say, you know what, Christian, we're going to keep you healthy, maybe not have you play, come back the last 2 games of the season, get some wrap-up work, and then we have a fresh, healed Christian McCaffrey for the playoffs, which would be remarkable, as opposed to him having to kind of power through this and potentially injure himself more, or, kind of then worry about compromising something else. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, that's all great insight on the McCaffrey injury. Maybe concern, maybe not. I guess it just really comes down to what Christian McCaffrey feels like. 2 final questions.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna completely
panic.
Yeah,
the word Achilles doesn't help.
I'm losing it over here. This calm demeanor that you see is all a facade. I am literally screaming on the inside.
Well, you have McCaffrey on like 15 fantasy teams.
I don't. I only have him on 1, and that's okay. And where I don't, I have Jordan Mason. Who cares about fantasy football, though? Nobody cares about fantasy football teams. We're here to talk about the real 49ers.
Real football. Doc, two final questions before we get out of here. Just real quick hitters. Prediction for Sunday. You think the Niners come out of Minnesota with a win?
Yeah, I mean they're playing Sam Darnold. I mean they're gonna win. I think it's. I think that's When is Sam Darnold got up for a big game? No, I think they'll win. I think it'll be a high scoring game. I think we'll see some more Purdy to IU connection. So yeah, I'm gonna say 33-17 49ers.
Perfect. And then final question. You spoiled it a little bit on Twitter about 25 minutes ago. What's the jersey in the cart right now? And what is this Jimmy Butler jersey? What's going on here? Like I just answered the question, but what is it?
There are these. Apparently, Sam Amick made a rumor that said the Warriors are heavily interested in bringing Jimmy Butler to the team, and they've made multiple phone calls. So maybe Jimmy Butler and the Warriors. I would give up some young picks for a Jimmy Butler. I mean, why not?
It's all due diligence. This is the question that I have. You don't just get rid of Brandon Pajemski for Jimmy Butler. You can't replace him anyway. Yeah. I'm obviously being facetious. Like I would love to see Steph get some help in this part of his career when he's been so good. But you and I have had the discussion before. I really, really want him to play with LeBron as a Warrior. Let me give you that caveat. As a Warrior, not as a Laker, as a Warrior. I think that's the last thing that Steph has to do, and I think they should do anything that they can to make that happen.
Absolutely, yeah. Just somebody to help Steph out. It would be great. Yeah.
All right, Doc. Well, it was a great time talking to you. You want to plug anything you got? Any podcasts you coming up on? Anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. You can check me out on Twitter at Dr. Nirav Pandia for social media's posts, kind of up-to-date stuff. And then we do have a sports injury podcast called 6 to 8 Weeks. You can find it on Apple Podcasts where we break down these injuries in a little more depth. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Nirav Pandia, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. And hopefully Christian McCaffrey gets healthy soon.
Yeah,
right.
Awesome.
Thank you, Doc. Friend of the podcast, but friend in real life. That's more important.
Honestly, exactly.
Thanks, Doc.
Take care,
appreciate
guys.
you, man.
Talk to you next week. All right, there it is. The first talk with Dr. Nirav Pandia. Yes, I'm also very concerned. You got to end the interviews like you're positive, right? No, it's not good. Obviously, the Christian McCaffrey, how it's kind of gone from this. Hey, he'll be fine. He's Christian McCaffrey. Of course, he's going to play. And I even said on the podcast last week when we were previewing Monday night was, well, if he's really hurt, they wouldn't be risking him tonight. Right? Like they start slow. And then of course, Jason, what happens not 3 hours after we end, they deactivate Christian McCaffrey. But yes, it's obviously a great concern, especially with how this offense works. But so to bring it into Sunday in the preview, Jason Aponte, Jordan Mason looked pretty good on Monday night. You got to feel pretty confident with him going into it. But Jason, final thoughts on Christian McCaffrey before we really dive into the Vikings Niners.
Not great, Bob.
No.
I was hoping to hear some better things. I didn't want Christian McCaffrey to play in this game. I don't want Christian McCaffrey to play in week 3 against the Rams. I didn't want him to play in week 4 against the Patriots. I think the San Francisco 49ers would be down to only, let me see, God, the horror, only 4 or 5 All-Pros with Christian McCaffrey out. How on earth will they ever be able to win games or sustain offense, Andrew Pasquini? But that's not good. Hearing literally Kyle Shanahan do a 180 from, we're not thinking about IR to, IR is a choice, and that is a little bit concerning. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not going to pretend like there's this sacred timeline that anybody can come up with to make this thing work. We just have to trust the 49ers, the doctors, and Christian McCaffrey to make sure that this doesn't go the wrong way, especially after he just signed that big deal. So And
Dr. Pandia made a great point. He talked about how every win kind of pushes the decision back a little bit, because this is it's really changed now to, they start slow to like, hey, maybe they need to start banking wins now, and especially too with the schedule as weak as it is, and the Vikings and the Rams. Nothing against the Rams, but they're going to be without Puka Nacua for a few weeks, so he's already going to be out. So the Rams are dealing with a bunch of injuries.
3 out of 5 linemen injured. But never fear, Rams fans. Akilla Weatherspoon's back.
Akilla Weatherspoon is back. Speaking of Akilla Weatherspoon, the 49ers, he used to be a 49er. They play the Minnesota Vikings. Look at that segue, Jason Aponte. They play the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday. There are, 16? There is exactly 16 1-0 teams right now. Well, there's one less now because the Dolphins lost last night. 15 1-0 teams. The Niners play one of them on Sunday. Not all 1-0s are equal. The 49ers beat the New York Jets on Monday night. The Vikings beat the New York Giants on Sunday. And I went back, Jason, and really, I don't want to start like this because this is a little mean because it's kind of a straight shot.
Oh, no, it's not.
I went back and watched the highlights, kind of an extended highlight of the Vikings Giants game. Like, hey, I'm gonna know what's going on with the Vikings. What made them successful in this game? And all I came out with was Daniel Jones is really bad at quarterback, and that's not gonna be in play on Sunday. But the Vikings do take advantage of Daniel Jones. I believe it was a 28-6 win. 2 interceptions, 5 sacks of Daniel Jones. Jason, I know it's tough with the first game being against the Giants, but we do have numbers to talk about and things to talk about. We've seen these teams now for 1 week of 17. What are your initial thoughts on who the Minnesota Vikings are in 2024?
Yeah, they won a game, and the New York Giants are absolutely putrid. I don't think that's going to change, in terms of 17 games. Right? Week 1 is not the week for sweeping statements where you can automatically say that, a team who's 1-0 is going to Super Bowl and a team that's 0-1 isn't going to do anything. But the New York Giants absolutely fucking stink. Let's make sure we get that out clearly. And they're going to be bad the entire season. I'm glad that you just watched the highlights because I watched the film. And God, that's longer and harder to watch because it's so embarrassing how bad the Giants were. They made the Vikings defense look super formidable. And I think the question that I have for you is this. I think the New York Jets defense is more talented than the Minnesota Vikings.
Yes.
But I think the Minnesota Vikings defense proves to be a bigger test for the San Francisco 49ers because of the coordinator and what he will be calling. When Brian Flores is dialing up these exotic blitzes and what is Purdy going to do. So the Vikings do present a better test on defense, not because of talent, but because of a coordinator. When we look at it, Kyle Shanahan has a track record of not being great against Jim Schwartz, Brian Flores, Steve Spagnuolo. Brian Flores is going to throw everything that he can at this offensive line. And while we were super impressed and they were great on Monday, I think this is a better test for the offensive line than the New York Jets defensive line and their scheme of just 4 guys and, cover 3 and just, bland stuff. I think this is going to show us a little bit more of the incremental steps that Brock Purdy's taking. But my God, man, watching that film, it was just awful to watch the New York Giants play football. I just want to make sure I say that again because they are fucking terrible. But the offense itself, when it's Kevin O'Connell, it's a lot of quick game stuff with Sam Darnold, getting the ball out quickly. That interior for that offensive line is where the 49ers have to eat. So last week it was Bosa and Floyd. This week it has to be Hargrave and Collins disrupting everything, and Sammy D is going to give you 1 at least and throw it right into somebody's belly.
Yeah, and you mentioned Brian Flores, and we saw what happened last year when the Brian Flores defense faced the Niners. Niners scored 17 points. Need to remember, though, Trent Williams was out, Deebo Samuel was out, and then as people on Twitter want to remind you, concussion, context, Purdy with his interceptions. The defense to me just feels different, and even like just DJ Wonnum, Danielle Hunter, they're not there anymore. They feel different on paper, and yes, like I just think so much of what last week was the New York Giants, and you're not going to be given those advantages, those type of things because it's not Daniel Jones throwing to God knows who. It's Brock Purdy to Deebo Samuel to Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle. It's just, Jerick McKinnon is not on the Vikings roster. Jason would breaks that jersey out whenever he needs to.
He should be running back depth for the San Francisco 49ers. But hey, we don't want to have that conversation.
We don't need to have that conversation. I really, and I know I do this a lot, Jason. It's really the easiest way to break down a football game in my brain. Nothing against the Minnesota Vikings. I think they are on track. I think they are on track to be a good football team. I think I somehow wrote 2 articles about the Minnesota Vikings this week and didn't mention Justin Jefferson once. And I don't think you need to because you just know he's there. And it's everything else around him. But this is one of those games where, yes, any given Sunday, anything can happen. The Vikings can hypothetically beat the 49ers. But the 49ers are just a better football team. And that's what's going to matter on Sunday. I just don't. I don't see a simulation in my head. JKBG, thank you. Swear after podcast, stay for the Beardsley for the blatant Jerick McKinnon propaganda. Yes, exactly. Like that's absolutely fair. That's what this podcast is.
It's blatant.
We still run pride on that. The McKinnon out of the Wildcat play in the Seahawks.
I found a McKinnon jersey in the wild.
You did
on and I sent it to our group chat, and everybody was just like, "What on earth?" Yeah,
it's such a random one. But no, I think this really comes down to the 49ers are a better football team than the Minnesota Vikings, and that's what's going to show on Sunday.
Yeah, and think back to last year's game, right? And everyone's just going to point to, well, Trent and Debo weren't there. Okay, Justin Jefferson didn't play in that game. Okay, even if Debo and Trent aren't there, you're still the better football team. Now let's go through what happened in that football game. Christian McCaffrey fumble, missed field goal, horrible cover zero call at halftime. That leads to 7 more points, 2 interceptions in the second half. If the 49ers don't absolutely vomit all over themselves, you're not talking about whether Trent Williams and Debo Samuel win this game. You even let Kirk Cousins win a primetime game. It would take a performance of that magnitude for the San Francisco 49ers to lose this game to the Minnesota Vikings. I know. They haven't won since 1992. I was 8 years old in 1992. That was the last time the 49ers have won. Ricky Waters was a rookie that year, right? But Sam Darnold, no Jordan Addison, no TJ Hawkinson. This offensive line is absolutely susceptible up the middle. The defense is absolutely not better than it was last year. The 49ers, even without Christian McCaffrey, still boast Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel, George Kittle, Trent Williams, Brock Purdy, Kyle Juszczyk, all of these other all-pros. If you mean to tell me that the San Francisco 49ers don't win this game because Christian McCaffrey missed it, we have a bigger conversation to visit and talk about. That's how I feel. I literally don't have anything to worry about in this game unless the 49ers vomit on themselves, which I don't see happening. And I think they are the far superior team. And we're in week 2. And obviously Christian McCaffrey's not there, but you're still better. And it shouldn't take Christian McCaffrey being there to beat the Minnesota Vikings with Sam Darnold. I'm sorry. With the way this defenses look, especially in week 1 against the run, with the way this offensive line played against that Jets defensive line, with the way that Brock Purdy has shown that he's playing a lot better in terms of processing and knowing things, why would I be worried now about the Minnesota Vikings? I don't get this part. And I understand everyone's going to bombard us with any given Sunday, and that's why you play the games. That's fine, and crazier things have happened, but I would be absolutely stunned if the San Francisco 49ers didn't win this game against the Minnesota Vikings.
I mean, you look at how hard they tried to lose the game last year and how poor of a performance that was with like the cover zero. And you're talking still, though, both of Brock Purdy's interceptions in the fourth quarter were in Minnesota territory, down 5 points. So as bad as the Niners played, they put themselves in situations twice as the game was coming down to the wire to win the game, and Purdy unfortunately throws the interceptions. Jason, you mentioned the losing streak, by the way. I was curious. I wanted to look up the list of quarterbacks that have beat the 49ers in Minnesota since 1992. Because the game,
Brett Favre is one of them. Give the money back.
Brett Favre also, by the way, that was the closest game of this streak of the. So, by the way, I mentioned at the top, just in case you missed it, Niners have not won a game in Minnesota since 1992. 7-game losing streak. The quarterback matchup the last time the Niners beat Minnesota in Minnesota, it was Steve Young versus Rich Gannon, which is just an interesting one. So I was curious, the list of quarterbacks to beat the 49ers on this streak. Are you ready? This is such a great list. 1994, it was Sean Salisbury. 1999, it was Jeff George. 2003, it was Gus Frerotte. 2009, it was Brett Favre. 2012, it was Christian Ponder. And then 2018, 2023 was Kirk Cousins. There's the list of quarterbacks that beat the Niners in Minnesota.
I'd be remiss in my duties if I didn't tell Brett Favre to give the money back and stop acting like everything's fine. Like, give the money back. Like, stop tweeting and stop talking about other things. Give the money back. My God, that list is horrific. Gus Frerotte.
Yeah, and
who faced Gus Frerotte?
Gus Frerotte was 2003. I believe that would put that Jeff Garcia. Let me double check for it. I just looked up the Vikings side of it because it seemed interesting. The 49ers side was Jeff Garcia and Tim Rattay. Garcia and Rattay played in both. So I'm assuming Garcia got hurt. Gus, are you guess Gus Frerott's stat line, Jason Aponte, in this 35-7 Minnesota Vikings win?
What, 4 tugs and like 300 yards?
16 for 21, 267 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions.
Aha!
3 of the touchdowns went to Randy Moss. 1 went to Nate Burleson.
Hey, Nate Burleson's on TV. Randy Moss is in the Hall of Fame. But hey, nice job with the guess on 4 touchdowns. High five yourself, Jason. Hell yeah.
Jason Aponte.
How the hell did I know that Gus Frerotte threw 4 touchdowns in that damn game? That's such a random thing to remember.
How many? Let's see if Jason can do it. 1999. How many did Jeff George throw against the 49ers? The final score was 40-16.
3.
Jeff George threw for 3 touchdowns and an interception, beating Jeff Garcia. Jason's hot. Are we going to 94? Sean Salisbury, I think that was 21-14. 21-14 was the final score. Sean Salisbury, let me find it. We're Googling it. Jason, go ahead, talk.
I'm going to say 1.
1. Yeah, that feels good. 1994 Vikings. We're totally off just because Jason.
No, we're not. This is good. I like this. Let's see if we get 3 in a row.
0 and 1.
Damn.
So no touchdown.
Damn it.
So we were off.
Damn it. All right. 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Elvis Gerback threw a touchdown. Niners lost 21-14.
2 out of 3 ain't bad. But I look, it's weird to think that, like, it doesn't matter the team, the quarterback, everything. The 49ers just somehow haven't got it. And it's just one of these weird things where it's not like, oh my God, the Vikings own you or anything like that. It's just like, this is just weird. Like, it's just strange. And the circumstances around these wins lead you to different things. Like, it's just weird.
Yeah, and I mean, even too, if you look at it, instead of just because it's the series hasn't only been in Minnesota, right? The Niners have had Minnesota visit, and you look at the Vikings in Santa Clara, it's the Niners win in 2021. The Niners win the playoff game in 2020. They won in 2015. Last time they lost to Minnesota in Santa Clara was 2007. So it's just one of those weird things that have nothing to do with this game. And Jason, one of the things we'll talk about that relates to this game is that interior defensive line or offensive line of the Minnesota Vikings. Garrett Bradbury, he's been limited in practice with a knee injury. He allowed 4 pressures on Sunday.
Hope he plays.
Well, you obviously hope he plays with those pressure numbers. Ed Ingram, he allowed 6 pressures from the right guard spot. He led the Vikings in pressures allowed last year. I think it was something like 52. They did have a tough matchup with Dexter Lawrence, one of the better defensive tackles in the league.
Easy.
Lawrence, I think he had 6 pressures on his own and 1 sack. But Niners on the other side, they have a pretty good defensive tackle group with Javon Hargrave and Malik Collins. So, Jason, is that really your key matchup on the 49ers defense? And one thing I do want to point out that the difference between the Niners defense and the Giants defense is the Giants do have a very good pass rush. We'll give them that. I think that defense,
Brian Burns is really good.
That. Brian Burns very good. Dexter Lawrence very good. But the backside's a little different. And obviously, this doesn't go without saying, Sam Darnold threw 1 incomplete pass clean. He was 5 for 9 under pressure. His only interception was under pressure. The Niners secondary is much different than the Giants secondary.
Yes.
So it's not just the Niners pass rush against the Vikings offensive line. It's also the Niners secondary involved. So it's not just, this might be a pressures more important than sacks type of game where you force Sam Darnold to make mistakes. What's your kind of take on the Hargrave versus Ingram matchup that we're going to see on Sunday?
Look, I mean, obviously you look at Christian Darrisaw and O'Neal, and that's Darrisaw's a dog. There's a reason that he's highly paid, right? And O'Neal is as solid as it gets at the tackle position. This doesn't mean that Bosa and Floyd are gonna no show, but if we're talking about where the strengths lie, Ed Ingram ended, and I understand PFF isn't the Bible, but when it fits my narrative, I love to run with it. You guys know, fits my narrative. Hashtag fits my narrative. Ed Ingram ended out of 100 on a pass blocking grade, 9.3. 9.3 out of 100 in this one. Now, regardless of whether you agree with the grading scale, I'm good. I'm not good. Garrett Bradbury, 26.8. So I don't mind if he plays. Like, it's either way. But this is a moment where the attention to the guys on the interior will leave guys wide open on the other side. Again, Nick Bosa and Floyd aren't going to go away, right? Because I think, obviously they had 9 of the 11 pressures on Monday Night Football. But interior-wise, this has to be Malik Collins. This has to be Javon Hargrave. And now I'm going to go off on a tangent. Javon Hargrave, you were incredible as a Philadelphia Eagle. The 49ers spent up out of nowhere. I don't think any of us I don't think any of us believed that Javon Hargrave was going to be the move for the 49ers. And you get here and let's just say you underwhelmed. Let's just keep it like that. You underwhelmed in your first year. We understand. You're a pass rusher. You're not much more of a run defender. That's what Eric Armstead's for. But if you can't make your money in this game on Sunday, if you can't make your money in this game, we're going to have to start having a different conversation, man. Like, seriously, I hate to be the guy who pocket watches because obviously, God bless you and good for your family. Like, that's great. But my God, man, if there was ever a game for you to step up, it's now. And it's in this one. And I'm going to need you to step up when it really, really matters. Like, in the playoffs when we get there. But when the matchup favors you, let's go, man. Like, let's go. I don't think we've gotten a Javon Hargrave game yet. And he's already been here for 16, 17 games, whatever it is, his career, like 18 games, regular season. If not now, when? So I'm looking at you. This is the big matchup. This is the way you've got to be able to put pressure on him, because if you make him process, if you make him move around a little bit, he is going to throw the football into someone's stomach. And the only way to do that consistently is probably through the middle at this time with this offensive line.
Yeah, and he mentioned that too. And it's not like this interior offensive line of the Vikings is a new issue. They weren't very good last year. I mentioned Ed Ingram led them last year in pressures. Hargrave had 2 pressures last year against his Vikings defense. So you want to see a little bit more. And like it just isn't going to help that you see what Dexter Lawrence did last week and how he destroyed the entire interior.
And Dexter Lawrence is very good. Let's just make sure we you know what? If we're talking interior guys, you probably got him at the top of your list.
Yeah, it's Chris Jones, Dexter Lawrence, but then that's the thing is Javon Hargrave is in that group. He's believed to be in that group. So you see what Leonard or Dexter Lawrence did last week. You're a week away, or you're a week separated from that now. We have something direct to compare it to. So like you hope he does better than the 2 pressures he had last week, or the 2 pressures he had last year against the Vikings, because you want that. You just, especially with how good the outside of that interior or the offensive line for the Vikings is maybe Bosa, Floyd won't get theirs. They're going to get theirs because they're good, but you want that more focus on the interior of the defensive line. And Hargrave just hasn't had that marquee moment, that marquee play, that marquee game. Well, maybe we see it a little bit on Sunday against this poor Vikings interior.
Yeah, and again, look, if it sounds harsh because I'm oversimplifying about be good at football type thing. Like Javon Hargrave is immensely talented. There's a reason that he has made the amount of money that he has, and he's produced the way that he has. But for all the stuff that we had to hear about, like Eric Armstead and how much he made and how much he's contributing, and you and I have been big proponents of impact and outweighing the stats, and hello, Eric Armstead, sack and really stuffing the run in week 1 against the Miami Dolphins. Look at that. It's when do we start to have this discussion with him at this point? So I think that's just where I'm at.
I'm going to flip the sides of the ball now. I'm going to talk 49ers offense, Minnesota offense, just a little bit. Just something I found interesting. Aaron Jones last week, he had 5 runs of 10-plus yards. The Vikings had 5 runs, 10-plus yards as a team, obviously, with Jones having all of them. That was the second most in the NFL last week. The 49ers had 6 runs of 10 or more yards. Jordan Mason had 5, so they're pretty equal there. But kind of interesting, different game between the two. Mason finished with 28 carries for 147 yards. Jones finished with 14 carries for 94 yards. If you take away the 10-plus yard runs, Aaron Jones' games last week was 9 carries for 24 yards. So
Mm-hmm.
majority of his game was those big runs. If you do the same thing for Jordan Mason, 23 carries for 77 yards, a lot more touches, obviously. Aaron Jones is one of those running backs that I think I'm a prisoner of what he used to be a little bit. You see the name and you say, oh, he had some good years with the Packers. He hasn't had those years for a couple years, but good game last week. Do you see him replicating that? And I know we haven't talked about Justin Jefferson. As I said, I don't see much value in talking about Justin Jefferson because we know yes, there's a million from the Niners aspect of it. There's a million reasons to talk about Justin Jefferson, but like we know as Niner fans that he's very talented. He's very good. So I wanted to talk about other aspects of this offense because Justin Jefferson is going to get his. There's a world where Justin Jefferson goes 9 for 110 tomorrow on Sunday, and the Niners win 28-10, and it's just like a ho-hum win. So I like what other parts of this Vikings offense can beat the Niners outside of Justin Jefferson. You see Aaron Jones having the same success, 14 carries for 94 yards, not too shabby of a game against the Giants, but a lot of it was that big run, as I said. How do you see him faring against this Niners defense that had a pretty good game against Breece Hall, albeit the Jets had to abandon the run pretty quickly?
I think it's funny because a few things. Last season against the Vikings, Alexander Mattison had one run for 50-something yards, and then I think it was like 12 carries for like 10 yards the rest of the way. So for all the talk about last year's 49ers run defense, which absolutely needed to improve, they pretty much held up in that game. Like they held up. Alexander Mattison is not better than Aaron Jones. They obviously upgraded talent-wise.
Yes.
Avery, please turn that down. All right. Now, Aaron Jones and the Detroit Lions exposed something in the run defense for the 49ers in the postseason by running outside, and they were able to gash the 49ers regularly that way. Now, we can talk about Steve Wilkes, and we can talk about run fits and all those things. For 1 week, the 49ers knocked all that shit off. All that shit off in week 1 with them getting outside, Bosa's stopping the crack toss by getting and setting the edge and allowing Fred Warner to get in there. That's where the 49ers are going to have to worry about Aaron Jones. Running him up the gut isn't going to change anything for them because of how their interior, defense is. Couple that with the fact that Dexter Lawrence was on the other side. Aaron Jones is absolutely an upgrade talent-wise to Alexander Mattison. But the way that the Vikings would be able to exploit this 49ers defense, I don't think are there anymore. I don't think that you're going to be able to run the football outside on this team the way that the Lions and Green Bay did, because obviously Isaiah Pacheco is not that type of guy. So you didn't see that in the Super Bowl. Plus, you don't need to do that. But I think when we're talking about how they're going to try to attack, I'm less worried about what Aaron Jones is going to do in this game because, again, the run defense has improved this much. But what if it's this much? Now you're talking about a top 10 unit when you think about the secondary and everything else. So I fear less about Aaron Jones. TJ Hawkinson's not in this game. Yes. Josh Oliver is their backup. Jordan Addison's not in this game. It's going to be Powell and Trent Sherfield. God help you. See, this is the thing that I keep talking about. Why do I keep looking at this game and being worried about what happened and what hasn't happened since 1992 when the team in front of me in 2024 is running out this team, and I'm looking at my team like I know what we are and I know what we got, and they're not even in the conversation with the 49ers. This is kind of where I am, like with the Aaron Jones thing. It's like, yes, he's better, but what they're going to try to do to use him is not going to work this time because Sorensen and his defense play the run better than last season.
Yeah, and you mentioned you mentioned you look at this team and say there's no way 2024 team, and you can make that argument. It's like, well, what happened last year with the Vikings? The Vikings were very good. And it's like, okay, but look everywhere else other than Aaron Jones. Kirk Cousins is better than Sam Darnold. I don't think we need to talk about that. Yeah,
right.
And then the pass rush, right? Danielle Hunter's a big loss. DJ Wonham, and I know who was it? Andrew Van Ginkel had a very good game for them last week. He's showing up on the injury report.
He had a very good game. Andrew, you saw the highlight, right? Daniel Jones threw the football into his stomach.
Well, that's the thing is the media guide for the Vikings talked about how it was, the first time in however long it is, 5 sacks, 2 interceptions for a Vikings defense. And it's like, okay, well, we got to mention who the quarterback was, and that's just really. I thought the Vikings defense did very good last week, but I just don't think they're going to get away with the same things that they did to the Giants and the Niners, and again, we're getting to the prediction portion. You could say last year it was, hey, the Niners are better than the Vikings. Why did they win? This Vikings team last year, I think, is better than this one this year. And it's just not remotely close. And I think that's going to show on Sunday.
And I think that's 100% true. And I think, again, Kevin O'Connell's a very underrated coach because I do think he does an incredible job, especially when you watch week 1. He did an incredible job of putting Sam in positions where he didn't have to think too much. And obviously you're facing a defense, whatever. Kevin O'Connell's a good coach. And he's a very good coach for quarterbacks, obviously, because he's a former quarterback. But, coaching, running up through McVay's tree with the Rams, he's a very good coach. Yes, that's absolutely true that the Vikings are better. But we've laid out the circumstances of what happened last season. And that game is more indicative of a team who shot themselves in the foot time after time rather than being beat pillar to post. We can do the same thing with the Cleveland game. If Jake Moody makes a kick, we're not talking about, oh my God, they lost the game with Deebo Samuel, right? That's a win. If they don't turn the football over in the red zone, they make their field goal, they don't have that. All of these things happen in games, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the team's better. So I guess that lends to the any given Sunday stuff. But I have a hard time looking at this 49ers team dead in their face that says we are going straight to the Super Bowl again and we're running for it and saying I need to be worried about the Minnesota Vikings. I will start worrying when I see an opponent that's worth worrying about, and it's just not them.
Yeah, no, not Minnesota, probably not the Rams. We'll talk about that next week. Jason, let's get to prediction. First prediction, we always do underdog. If you use the promo code Aponte, they'll match up to $1,000 on your first deposit. Promo code Aponte. Jason, give us your three Niner players on underdog that you're looking out for.
Well, this seems too easy. Again, Jawan Jennings, 16.5 receiving yards. Higher. I don't see how that is something that is still out there for anybody to take. So I'm absolutely smashing that. There's a Mitch Wisnowski prop out there. If you guys want to troll me, go ahead and go for it. I think that's hilarious about it. But I'm looking, and it doesn't look like right now they have any props up for offensive players based on the Christian McCaffrey thing right now.
Okay.
But whatever, here's what I'll do. Is Jawan Jennings over receiving yards, 16.5. That's easy. That's higher. He got that on one catch against the Jets last week. And, Brandon Ayuk played. I still think it's a similar thing. Anything that has to do with Brock Purdy's rushing yards, which on FanDuel right now is 9.5. Over 9.5 rushing yards. And obviously, I've got Brandon Ayuk for whatever his receiving total is. It was 58.5 the last time I checked. On FanDuel, over. So those are the three that I'm looking at right away. And if you're doing betting, obviously 49ers money line is in there, and Jordan Mason anytime touchdown. But underdog right now is scrambling a little bit after the news about Christian McCaffrey. But those are the ones that you need to really look at. But I mean, anything with Jawan Jennings, 16.5, 19.5, over. Always over. Always. And always over the Purdy rushing yards. Always.
Tied for the team lead and receptions last week. So Jawan Jennings was used pretty heavily, even with Deebo Samuel. Like the full selection of receivers were there. And Jawan Jennings, 5 receptions, tied for the team lead. So he's definitely getting some attention this year. Jason, outright predictions. I'll go first. I don't think this is going to be close. Yeah. I have the final score is 35-13 49ers. The week 1, I guess you could say the rust was 8 consecutive scoring drives with 6 of those being field goals. I have a feeling more of those drives are going to turn into touchdowns on Sunday. This game's not going to be close. 49ers 35, Vikings 13.
And if you guys want to see a full detailed response about the predictions, I don't know if anybody knows who's ever watched this show. Andrew and I write for NinersNation.com, and we put out our predictions today with Rohan and Kyle. I've got a 28-13. I really don't see a path to victory for the Vikings other than the 49ers just absolutely vomiting on themselves.
Yeah, and I just don't see that happening.
Right. It's just, look, again, oh no, Christian McCaffrey's not going to play. Fine. Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk. You know how many teams would kill to just have those 3 guys on top of the fact of Christian McCaffrey? Like, let's not overcomplicate this. I understand the I guess it's hesitant to be boastful because it's 1992 since the last time they won.
Yeah.
But be confident in your team. You know exactly what's in front of you, and you know what you have. You know it's better. And we're not going to walk away from this game regardless, saying that the Minnesota Vikings are somehow better than the San Francisco 49ers. They have to be able to win this game regardless. It is too easy. You have too many players. I don't want to hear any excuses in this one, and I don't want to see any fumbles here, this, that, terrible calls. I don't think any of that is going to happen. I think the universe corrects itself, and the 49ers break this streak, and I'm not particularly worried about it at all.
No, this should be a ho-hum win for the 49ers. Jason, it's always fun. We talked a lot today. We talked to Dr. Nirav Pandia. He talked to us Christian McCaffrey injury. Then we previewed this whole Vikings game. Niners looking like, ideally going 2-0 on Sunday. But Jason, it's always fun talking Sprint Right Option Podcast. 49ers football. We are finally really back in the swing of it now. Week 2, I feel like week 1 is that first feeling out week. We know what the Niners look like now. And everything else from here that's the expectation. And we'll see how it continues. We'll see if the Niners can go 2-0. Jason Aponte, always fun talking, as always.
Let's go Niners, man. Don't trip. We'll be fine.
No, Niners will be fine. I promise. That's a Sprint Red Option Podcast guarantee. 49ers win.
Welcome, everybody.
We are live.
My name is Jason Aponte.
I am Andrew Pasquini.
We're working. That's it. We're working over here. That's it. Let's go Niners.
Let's go Niners.